This comes from a big fan in the UK. I'm willing to bet that that is not what his birth certificate says. But that's what his email said. I was watching WWE off and on back in 2009, and remember a feud between Kofi Kingston and Randy Orton. Kofi was hot and seemed like he was one of the top 3 babyfaces during that period. I'd like to know why Kofi isn't doing anything right now, and do you think that he will ever be at that level ever again? I feel like Kofi is too talented to simply be a jobber or a mid-carder. Well, what happened was he was feuding with Randy Orton. I was in the building at Madison Square Garden that night when he did the boom drop in the crowd through Orton, who was laying on the announce table. Well, not the announce table, but he had laid him out on the table, did the boom drop. The place went nuts. And that was his big coming out party. Like, okay, this guy, he may be a big star. People looked at Kofi Kingston seriously for the first time. He got this monster babyface reaction. And it was like, this is really cool. And for that to happen in New York, in the middle of Madison Square Garden, that was a big deal. I'm sure that was a big deal to him. And what happened is, they had a match. I think it may have been on Raw. I think it was a singles match. Maybe it could have been a tag, but I'm going to guess it was a singles match. And if I remember correctly, Orton was going to deliver the punt kick to Kofi, and Kofi stood up. And he wasn't supposed to. Orton walked over to him and, like, shoved him down, almost as a way of saying, like, stay down, but Kofi just kept getting up. Maybe he forgot the spot or whatever. And then all of a sudden, Orton is like, all right, he kind of switches to RKO mode. He drops down. He's pounding on... I remember him pounding on the mat more than he usually does. Like, he's pounding out of anger. I think he was cursing. He may have been saying, like, fuck, fuck, fuck the whole time. He was, like, cursing up a storm. And then he finally gives Kofi an RKO. And I remember that because it was maybe the most brutal RKO I've ever seen him deliver to a person before. The one to Evan Bourne is probably the most spectacular when Evan Bourne did that. I think Evan Bourne did his move. It was like a 450 flip off the top, and Orton caught him for the RKO. That was pretty spectacular, but the most brutal RKO was the one he gave to Kofi, because it looked real. It was like he really just destroyed the guy. Drove him down into the mat, or right onto his shoulder, whatever it was, and Orton immediately got up, and that's when he started yelling, "Stupid, stupid," at Kofi, and then he pinned him, and he just looked pissed. And Orton was prone, and maybe still is, but more so back then, he was prone to having these meltdowns where he would just freak out and just get pissed off at the slightest thing. And unfortunately for Kofi, he was the recipient of that venom that night. And you could probably trace it back to that. I can't tell you, sitting here right now, that that's the reason why Kofi Kingston has never been pushed at that same exact level ever since. But the evidence is right there. What have they done with him since then? What have they done with him since then? Because after that, the feud with Orton basically came to an end. They may have had one more match. I think Orton won. And they moved on. And they never did anything with Kofi again. Why would you squander that? Why would you squander the type of reaction that Kofi got that night at Madison Square Garden? Vince McMahon, I'm sure, loves, he loves the Garden. It's like their home. I know their home base is in Connecticut, but Madison Square Garden is like WWE's home for so many years. As the Garden goes, so does WWE. And if the New York fans get behind somebody, then by God, that means they're somebody. Well, the New York fans got behind Kofi that night, but apparently somebody forgot to tell Vince McMahon. So I think it goes back to that match. Whatever happened, whoever's fault it was, maybe Kofi was at fault. Shit happens. It's not like the whole match fell apart. It's not like he intended for that to happen. But I'm sure you could find the video somewhere. It's just like, punt kick. No, Kofi's getting up. All right, stay down. No, he's not staying down. Fuck. RKO. Fuck you. Your career is over. It's like, there's your reenactment about what happened that night. And that sucks because Kofi is really good. I think he's long overdue for a heel turn. I think I first pitched the idea of turning Kofi Kingston heel, cutting his hair, and putting him in a suit like 4 years ago or 5 years ago on this show. Maybe somebody can go back and find it. I know I've talked about that before. And I wouldn't advocate that for anybody. Like when Seth Rollins did the heel turn a few weeks ago, I said, God, I hope he doesn't show up on TV wearing a suit. And his first appearance, he was on TV wearing a suit. There are some guys where you don't want them just to be dressed up like everybody else. I just always envisioned, though, if Kofi did turn heel, he'd have to cut the hair or cut the hair short, and putting him in a suit, I just think it would work for him. That was my initial thoughts on it. And he's been a babyface the whole time, and he's a great utility player for them to have. They can plug him in there when they want him to do an amazing spot. They do the stuff with him whenever he's in the Royal Rumble or a Battle Royal where he almost gets eliminated, but he doesn't. And he could be a tag team champion. He could be a U.S. champion. He can fill that role, but you're right. I mean, he's a talented enough guy where he should be doing better. That was in 2009. That's the problem, though. That was 5 years ago. God, I can't believe it's been that long. 5 years. So it's been 5 years of Kofi Kingston doing a whole lot of nothing. It's hard to break out of that stigma because after a certain amount of time, people just look at you a certain way. It's very, very hard to get away from that. Part of me wonders maybe if it's too late. I would try. I would still try to do something with him, maybe whether it's the heel turn or whatever. But boy, that was 5 years ago, and he had the shot, and fans probably just looked at that and said, oh, he wasn't good enough because they beat him and they never did anything with him. And perception is reality. It's hard to break out of that stigma, especially after so many years of being at a certain level.